Being America's oldest president, the complicated reality inside. Last winter, President Biden was once awakened around 3 in the morning. Upon learning that a missile had struck Poland while on a trip to Asia, there was a worry that Russia may have extended the conflict in Ukraine to a NATO ally. Mr. Biden phoned the NATO Secretary General and the President of Poland within hours in the middle of the night, consulted his senior aides, and collected other world leaders to deal with the problem. Then there was the incident a few weeks ago when the president misspoke while attempting to list his grandchildren while hosting kids for Take Your Child to Work Day. Let me see, then. I have 1 in Philadelphia, 2 in New York, or is it 3? No, 3, I have 1 grandchild who might be, I dunno. You're confusing me, he added when asked to name a favorite movie or the most recent nation he had visited. The two Joe Bidens coexist in the same octogenarian president, capable of rising to the occasion even in the middle of the night to face a frightening world. They are sharp and intelligent at crucial moments and the result of years of experience. However, in ways that sound familiar to anybody who has reached their 9th decade or knows a parent who has, he was a bit slower, a little softer, a little harder of hearing, a little more cautious in his walk, and a little more prone to sporadic memory lapses. A bipartisan agreement he negotiated to avert a national default was approved by Congress on Thursday, encapsulating the complex reality of America's oldest president. In his testimony, even Speaker Kevin McCarthy praised Vice President Biden for being very professional, very smart, and very tough during their discussions. But moments before the voting began, Mr. Biden fell to the ground at the Air Force Academy commencement after tripping over a sandbag. Anyone may misstep at any age, but for an 80-year-old president, it unavoidably raises uncomfortable questions. The video went viral, his fans winced, and his detractors pounced. The age-related changes might not be obvious if it were someone else. But Mr. Biden is the president of the most powerful country in the world and has just started a campaign asking voters to keep him in the White House until age 86, bringing more attention to a problem that polls show concerns the majority of Americans and is a major source of worry among party leaders. The portrait that emerges from months of interviews with numerous current and former officials and others who have spent time with him lies somewhere between the partisan caucus and the more nuanced views. It shows a man who has aged more noticeably than only by having graying hair, which is a characteristic of most recent presidents while they were in office. Due to his stiff walk and poor voice, Mr. Biden occasionally mumbles his sentences and appears older than he once did. However, those who interact with him frequently, including some of his foes, claim that he is still bright and in charge in private meetings. Diplomats recount how he frequently outlives younger colleagues on missions to countries like the Ukraine, Japan, Egypt, Cambodia, and Indonesia. His verbal slip-ups are nothing new. Acquaintances point out, he has labored throughout his life with a stutter and was a gaffe machine, to use his own description, even before he entered Social Security years. Democratic lawmakers point to a long list of accomplishments as evidence that he still gets the job done. His judgment is as sound as ever, according to advisors. They characterize him in so many ways that the term sharp as a tack almost seems like a chant. Age, according to Mr. Biden, is a real concern, but he insists that his longevity is a strength rather than a weakness. "You claim I'm old?" he declared in April during the White House Correspondents' Association dinner. Few people, though, are oblivious to the changes in one of the country's most well-known figures. "I say I'm wise." 12 years ago, Mr. Biden participated in spirited squirt gun fights every summer with the kids of staff members and reporters. He walked stiffly across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, more than 10 years later to commemorate Bloody Sunday. According to polls, the age of the president is a major worry for Americans, particularly Democrats. One supporter of Mr. Biden in 2020 raised concern at a recent New York Times focus group, saying, "I've simply seen the blank stare at times, when he's either giving a speech or addressing a crowd. He appears to become disoriented in his thinking." Democrats' concerns about Mr. Biden's age are pervasive. It was the only topic of conversation among party donors, according to a major Wall Street Democrat who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity in order to avoid upsetting the White House. Everyone at the small dinner of former Democratic senators and governors earlier this year, all of whom belonged to Mr. Biden's generation, agreed that he was too old to run for office again. In private, administration officials agree that they take what they deem to be acceptable precautions not to physically tax an aging president. Local leaders frequently call the White House to inquire about his health. The majority of his public appearances are scheduled by his staff between noon and 4 p.m. and try to avoid leaving him alone on weekends. The morning cadence of Mr. Biden and the president he succeeded, Barack Obama, is comparable, according to a study of Mr. Biden's schedule based on information gathered by Axios and expanded by the New York Times. Neither Mr. Obama nor Mr. Biden held many public events before 10 a.m., only 4% during Mr. Obama's final year in office and 5% throughout Mr. Biden's first 2.5 years. But the evening marked the actual change. After 6 o'clock, Mr. Obama was twice as likely to hold public events. 17% versus 9% for Mr. Biden. The president's exposure to news media interviews is restricted when his errors could be politically detrimental. He has only given a sixth of the interviews that Mr. Obama and Donald J. Trump gave over the same time frame, and none to reporters from a major newspaper. Unlike every president other than Dwight D. Eisenhower since at least Franklin D. Roosevelt, Mr. Biden has not granted an interview to the Times News Division. And only Richard M. Nixon and Ronald Reagan have endured as few press conferences over the past 100 years. As with prior presidents, White House officials did not make Mr. Biden's physician available for questioning. White House physician Kevin C. O'Connor wrote in a 5-page letter from February that Vice President Biden is fit for duty, and fully executes all of his responsibilities without any exemptions or accommodations. The letter said there were no findings which would be consistent with a neurological disorder like stroke, multiple sclerosis, or Parkinson's disease, but added that the president's propensity to walk stiffly is in fact a result of degenerative, wear and tear, changes in his spine, and partly the result of tighter hamstrings and calves. For atrial fibrillation, cholesterol, heartburn, asthma, and allergies, he takes medication. Like many people his age, Mr. Biden frequently relates anecdotes that lack facts and repeats phrases. He can be odd. If kids come around, he can haphazardly grab a William Butler Yeats book off his desk and begin reading Irish poetry to them. He also exercises 5 days a week, does not drink, and is trim and athletic. He has occasionally displayed impressive endurance, as when he flew to Poland, took a 9-hour train, spent hours on the ground in Kyiv, then endured another 9-hour train ride before boarding a flight to Warsaw. He has traveled a little bit more in the first few months of his third year in office than Mr. Obama did in his, according to a review of his calendar by Mr. Biden's staff. Image. Is he rambling? Yes, he does, said Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey, a Democrat who categorically rejects the idea that Mr. Biden is too old to be president. Has he always blathered on? He has, indeed. Public and private. He's the same guy. He's literally, I'm not saying this lightly. I don't know anyone else in my life who is so much the same guy privately as he is publicly. Some friends bristle at the attention to his age. I think the reason this is an issue is primarily because of the media talking about it constantly, said former Senator Ted Kaufman, a longtime advisor to Mr. Biden from Delaware. I do not see anything in my dealings with him that age is a problem. He's done more than any president has been able to do in my lifetime. Andrew Bates, a White House spokesman, noted that Republican hardliners were grousing that Mr. Biden had gotten the better of Mr. McCarthy in the fiscal deal. It's telling that the same extreme MAGA members of Congress who've been talking about his age complained this week that he outsmarted them on the budget agreement, Mr. Bates said. The question of Mr. Biden's age does not come in isolation, of course. Mr. Trump, his likeliest Republican challenger, is just 4 years younger and was the oldest president in history until Mr. Biden succeeded him. If Mr. Trump were to win next year, he would be 82 at the end of his term, older than Mr. Biden will be at the end of this one. While in office, Mr. Trump generated concerns about his mental acuity and physical condition. He did not exercise, his diet leaned heavily on cheeseburgers and steak, and he officially tipped the scales at 244 pounds, a weight formerly deemed obese for his height. After complaining that he was overscheduled with morning meetings, Mr. Trump stopped showing up at the Oval Office until 11 or 11:30 a.m. each day, staying in the residence to watch television, make phone calls or send out incendiary tweets. During an appearance at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, he had trouble lifting a glass of water and seemed to have trouble making his way down a modest ramp. Most striking was Mr. Trump's cognitive performance. He was erratic and tended to ramble. Experts found that he had grown less articulate and that his vocabulary had shrunk since his younger days. Aides said privately that Mr. Trump had trouble processing information and distinguishing fact from fiction. Several cabinet secretaries worried that he might be mentally unfit discussed using the 25th Amendment to remove him, and Mr. Trump's second chief of staff, John F. Kelly, purchased a book analyzing his psychological health to better understand him. But perhaps because of his bombastic volume, which exudes energy, Mr. Trump's issues are not as closely linked to age in the public mind as Mr. Biden's are. In a recent Reuters/Ipsos poll, 73% said Mr. Biden is too old to be in office, compared with 51% who said the same of Mr. Trump. Mr. Biden manages his day with more discipline than his predecessor. Jill Biden, who teaches at Northern Virginia Community College, gets up around 6 a.m. while the president wakes an hour later, according to accounts he has given. Mr. Biden has told aides that their cat sometimes wakes him in the middle of the night by walking across his face. By 7:20 a.m., the First Lady leaves for work. Mr. Biden works out at 8 a.m., he has a Peloton bicycle in the residence and is known to watch shows like Morning Joe on MSNBC. He arrives at the Oval Office by 9 a.m. for a morning usually filled with meetings. For lunch, there is a rotation of salad, soup and sandwiches. Following afternoon events, the president returns to the residence around 6:45 p.m. for dinner. Pasta is a favorite. In fact, one former official said, whenever he travels, aides make sure there is always red sauce on hand for pasta to finish his day, even as he balks at the salmon that his wife urges on him. From 8 p.m., the Bidens often read their briefing books together in the living room of the residence. The First Lady typically turns in at 10:30 p.m. and the president follows a half-hour later. Aides say it is clear he actually reads the briefing books because of the questions that follow. There's no one who is better at asking questions to get to the bottom of an issue, calling your bluff, asking the tough questions, said Stephanie Feldman, the White House staff secretary. He asks just as tough questions today as he did 10 years ago. Some who accompany him overseas express astonishment at his ability to keep up. When Italy's new leader pushed for a meeting while the president was in Poland, he readily agreed to add it to the already packed schedule. During a trip to Ireland, people with him said he was energized and wanted to talk at length on Air Force One rather than rest. Still, after fatiguing days on the road, he skipped dinner with world leaders in Indonesia last year and again in Japan in May. Others who have known him for years said privately that they have noticed small changes. When he sits down, one former official said, he usually places a hand on his desk to hold his weight and rarely springs back up with his old energy. He speaks so softly that he can be hard to hear. For speeches, aides give him a handheld microphone to hold close to his mouth to amplify his voice even when standing at a lectern with mounted microphones. Yet aides said that while he can momentarily forget a name or fact, he retains a formidable memory for detail. Preparing to travel to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, on the 20th anniversary of the attacks of September 11, 2001, he became frustrated that officials had given him the wrong plan for his movements. He had been to the memorial before and knew the plan made no sense because he remembered the layout of the grounds. White House officials voice aggravation that concern about age is inflated by pictures on the internet that are sometimes faked or highly distorted. Every week, strategists conduct a word cloud analysis with a panel of voters asking what they had heard about the president, good or bad. After Mr. Biden's foot got caught in the tow cage of his bicycle and he tumbled over last year, the two words in the bad word cloud for weeks were bike fell, all the more frustrating for aides who noted that Mr. Trump hardly seemed capable of even riding a bike. Mr. At the correspondents' dinner, Mr. Biden reassured the audience that he supported the First Amendment, and not just because my good friend Jimmy Madison wrote it. During the Take Your Child to Work Day event, he reflected on when I was your age. Mr. Reagan won re-election in 1984 at age 73 in part with a well-timed debate quip about not exploiting my opponent's youth and inexperience. And at the Air Force Academy a few days ago, Mr. Biden joked that when I was graduating from high school 300 years ago, I applied to the Naval Academy. After tripping on the sandbag, he sought to laugh that off too. I got sandbagged, he said. Peter Baker is the chief White House correspondent and has covered the last 5 presidents for The Times and The Washington Post. He is the author of 7 books, most recently The Divider, Trump in the White House, 2017 to 2021, with Susan Glasser. At Peter Bakerneat, Facebook. Michael D. Shear is a veteran White House correspondent and 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner who was a member of team that won the Public Service Medal for COVID coverage in 2020. He is the co-author of Border Wars, Inside Trump's Assault on Immigration. At Shearm. Katie Rogers is a White House correspondent, covering life in the Biden administration, Washington culture and domestic policy. She joined The Times in 2014. At Katie Rogers. Zolan Kano-Youngs is a White House correspondent covering a range of domestic and international issues in the Biden White House, including homeland security and extremism. He joined The Times in 2019 as the Homeland Security correspondent. At Kano-Youngs.